Hey everyone, welcome back to Storyline. Today, we're diving into one of the most defining events in American history, the Civil War. Now, the American Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865, and it was a time when the country was torn apart over big issues like slavery, states' rights, and the very meaning of freedom and equality. This wasn't just a war with guns and battles. It was a battle for the soul of a young nation. Let's break down what led to this, who the key players were, and how the legacy of this conflict still impacts us today. So grab a seat, maybe a snack, and let's get started. Alright, so let's start with some context. The United States in the mid-1800s was growing rapidly. New states were being added to the Union, but each new state posed a question: would it be a free state or a slave state? This question wasn't just about economics or politics, it was about morality and values. On one side, we had the southern states, where the economy was largely built on agriculture. Think cotton, tobacco, rice, and all of this relied heavily on enslaved labor. By 1860, about 4 million black men, women, and children were enslaved in the South. This was the foundation of Southern wealth, but it also created deep divisions with northern states, where slavery was either abolished or on its way out. The northern economy, on the other hand, was more industrialized. Northern states had factories, railroads, and a growing middle class, and while they weren't perfect on racial issues, they opposed the expansion of slavery. Many Northerners felt that allowing slavery to spread westward would morally and economically corrupt the country. But it wasn't just about slavery itself. It was also about something we call states' rights. Southern states argued that they should have the power to decide for themselves whether or not to allow slavery. They believed in a limited federal government, with most powers kept at the state level. To them, the federal government telling states they couldn't have slaves felt like a direct attack on their sovereignty. Northern states, however, believed that the federal government had a responsibility to uphold human rights and stop the spread of slavery. This conflict over states' rights versus federal power became a huge philosophical battle. So, on the surface, it's about state power, but we can't forget that at its core, it's slavery that's driving this divide. So, things really boiled over in 1860 when Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Now, Lincoln was a Republican, and the Republican Party was fairly new back then. The party had a strong anti-slavery stance, especially against expanding slavery into new Western territories. Lincoln himself wasn't an outright abolitionist at the start, he just wanted to stop slavery from expanding. But for the South, Lincoln's election was seen as a major threat. They felt like he represented a government that wanted to end their way of life, which, unfortunately, meant an economy deeply tied to slavery. Within months of his election, 7 southern states decided they'd had enough. They seceded from the Union and formed their own country, called the Confederate States of America. By April 1861, tensions had reached a tipping point. The first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter in South Carolina on April 12, 1861. Confederate forces attacked the fort, which was controlled by Union troops. This battle only lasted a day, but it marked the official start of the Civil War. After Fort Sumter, both sides began mobilizing. More southern states joined the Confederacy, while northern states rallied behind the Union. It's easy to look back and think it was obvious which side would win. But back then, people thought it would be a short conflict. The South had experienced generals, they knew their land well, and they were fiercely motivated to defend their independence. The North, on the other hand, had more people, more factories, and a stronger industrial base. So, the stage was set for a long and brutal conflict. Alright, let's fast forward a bit and talk about some of the major battles. I won't go through every single one, but let's highlight some key moments. The Battle of Bull Run, Manassas. This was the first major battle, and it took place in July 1861. The Confederates won, and it was a wake-up call for the North that this war would be longer and tougher than they'd thought. Antietam in 1862. The Battle of Antietam in Maryland. became the single bloodiest day in American military history, with over 22,000 casualties. It was technically a draw, but it gave Lincoln the opportunity. He needed to announce the Emancipation Proclamation. Gettysburg, this is probably the most famous battle. In 1863, the Union and Confederate forces clashed in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. After 3 days of fighting, the Union won, marking a turning point in the war. This is also where Lincoln later delivered the Gettysburg Address, a powerful speech about freedom and unity. Sherman's march to the sea by late 1864. Union General William Tecumseh Sherman led a brutal campaign through Georgia, destroying railroads, farms, and resources. This was part of what's known as Total War, designed to break the Confederacy's will to fight. One of the major turning points of the war was Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863. This wasn't a simple document. It didn't instantly free all enslaved people, but it declared that enslaved people in Confederate territories would be forever free. It was also a strategic move, preventing European countries from supporting the Confederacy. This turned the war into a fight against slavery, not just a battle to keep the Union together. By 1865, the Confederacy was running out of resources, men, and morale. The end came in April when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. This marked the official end of the Civil War, although smaller skirmishes continued for a bit. The Union had won, but at an enormous cost. Over 600,000 soldiers died, and the Southern economy was in ruins. However, the war paved the way for the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery throughout the United States. It was a massive, hard-won victory for human rights, but the challenges were far from over. After the war, the U.S. entered a period known as Reconstruction. This was supposed to be a time of rebuilding and reuniting the country, but it was far from easy. Freed Black Americans faced severe discrimination and violence, especially as groups like the Ku Klux Klan emerged. The Civil War and Reconstruction left a lasting impact. It redefined federal versus state power, ended slavery, and set the stage for the civil rights movements that would follow. Today, we're still grappling with issues related to race, equality, and justice that trace back to this era, so there you have it. The American Civil War, a brutal, transformative conflict that reshaped the United States in ways that still matter today. If you found this video helpful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments if there's a topic you'd like me to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.